I'm Jason Sylvia, and this is the Creative Capital Show. A show about creative people and how those creative people turn into entrepreneurs by taking their creativity and turning it into a business and facing all the trials and tribulations along the way. Turning tragedy into triumph. That's the best way I can introduce this episode's guest. Ashley Bendiksen turned her tragedy of being a victim of abuse and hitting rock bottom into a triumphant journey of self-discovery, which led her to become an expert in abuse prevention, a top national youth speaker, business and empowerment coach, author, and award-winning activist. Again, tragedy into triumph. Enjoy. Like a saying that I would attribute to you is turning tragedy to triumph. At least that's how I would sum it up. That would be like the movie title. But if you were to explain or describe your story and your background, and just whoever's listening to this, and give the quick introduction and then go into what your story is, I think that would probably be the best way to start off.
Yeah, I really like what you just said, the whole tragedy into triumph thing. I've not used that phrase, but a lot of times I'll say that I've found a way to turn my pain into purpose. And, it's exactly what someone would think. I, went through a lot of trauma and hardship in my adolescence, and it completely turned my life upside down from, a 6-year cycle of kind of on and off abusive relationships, a lot of self struggles, mental health struggles, academic challenges. Long story short, by the time I was 19, I was a college dropout, I was homeless, and I was, on the early days of recovering from abuse. And, as much as I was really broken in that moment, I just remembered feeling like I had to partly make up for lost time, but also that I really wanted to do something to give back to other people going through the same experiences. So essentially, it began this crazy journey of just volunteering, getting involved, putting my life back together. And it's brought me to where I am today, where I'm now speaking full-time on the issues that once affected me in my life. I'm an expert on these issues. I'm an activist. I'm a coach. I'm an author. And I've just found a way to turn all of my experiences into, a vehicle to help others.
So first off, that's amazing. And bravo to that. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
We need more people like that in the world. But I don't know why I just said that, but I want to ask and go into, because you had all that stuff going on, right? The abuse, and then the issues with mental health, and then the issues with dropping out of school, issue of being home, so many things stacked upon, one thing after another. Was there a particular moment, or was it more of a gradual change or evolution, or was it one moment that changed your mind, so it was like, I'm going to turn all this around? Was it one specific thing, or was it a number of things to help you go through that transformation? The journey itself was definitely building blocks, one on top of the next. But the moment that kind of changed my perspective was pretty instant. I had, just to kind of give you some details. So my final abusive relationship ended because I was severely attacked. And so I had to go through this whole court process. And I just had this crazy moment when I left the courthouse where I suddenly realized that I was entirely free to do whatever I wanted. I had lived so many years where every choice I made, I had to think about my partner and whether they would get upset at me. And so I suddenly just remember thinking, I can go get an iced coffee and not get in trouble because I didn't think of my partner and get one for them, or I can take the long way home. And I suddenly just realized how ridiculous it seemed that I had given up myself and my goals and my education because of this bad relationship, but really just because of many bad relationships, surrounding myself with the wrong friends. I just didn't know who I was. And I a lot of times I've told this story and said, I had this aha moment, but I really think it was my intuition finally kicking back in, where it was like, Ashley,
Like, now go. What have you been waiting for? Like, none of this was ever you. There's nothing wrong with you. And I remember feeling like if I keep struggling, they keep winning, right? Like, my abusive ex is going to keep winning if I keep struggling in life. And that little mindset shift just changed my perspective on everything. And so while the journey was, difficult from that moment on, just kind of having that spark and that change of thought is really where it began. And it's kind of when I knew I was going to make my life better, and I was willing to figure it out, whatever that took.
So would you say that it's also a process of self-discovery as well? Because you had mentioned through that detailed explanation that you didn't know who you were. I think that happens for a lot of people sometimes, no matter what they go through in life. For a lot of people, they may have a moment where it's like, what am I doing here? Is this really me? So would you say that there was a process of self-discovery after that moment as well, of like, hey, who am I? And like, what do I want to be and what do I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what haunted me the most. It wasn't the abuse, the trauma, the hardship. It was suddenly realizing I had no idea who I was. And even like, before I dropped out of college, I picked nursing just because my friends chose nursing. And it was like, what do I love, or what am I great at? And I never took the time to figure out who I authentically was or what my passions were in life. And it's interesting because even though I felt really self-conscious and I still had confidence issues and I still didn't think that highly of myself, I started to put myself out there, and I learned skills that I had that I'd never even recognized, like my ability to speak or my ability to take on leadership roles. I mean, those are things I never even knew were possible for me until I just started putting myself out there. So I definitely learned who I am and what I'm capable of.
I want to get a little bit tactical here, as far as, because this is the nature of this podcast is more creative businesses and entrepreneurs. So getting a little bit more tactical and into the business side, because you were stating about putting yourself out there and then going after what you want. Do you think that can be said for not only people who are victims of abuse, which is horrible, but also people who may feel like they're trapped, whether it's the responsibilities of, family or the family dynamic that they're in, whether they are the head of a family or they're part of like a household that expects them to be or work a certain job because that's what's expected of them. Maybe they went to a professional career because it was what their friends were doing, or it was the thing that made money at the time, and now they've made the money, so it's like, hey, what am I doing here? What do you think for others can they do to also switch that mindset of starting that journey of self-discovery? Maybe somebody's listening to this right now and they feel trapped.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be dynamics that make changes and shifts more difficult, especially if you have, a lot of overhead with finances and a family to provide for. But I think, when you really take the time to think about the conventional path, it's all quite arbitrary. Like, at one point in time, the 9 to 5 made sense at a certain point in history because of the industry that was going on. And nowadays, I think it's just a matter of, we're the ones holding ourselves back by thinking, I'm supposed to do these things in this order, or this is the way things are done, when in reality, it's not. We live in a very different world. And, there is not one way to make money or make a living. There is not one schedule that you have to work. And also, I think, especially if someone's a parent, for example, I mean, one of the greatest things you can do as a parent is to show your kids how to also pursue their passions and goals and dreams in life, and to live a life where you're not being your authentic self or you're not going after your dreams. It doesn't set a good example. So I think when you can fully tap into who you are and what you want in life and what your purpose is, one, you're going to find more fulfillment. 2, you're going to have more happiness to show up for the people in your life. And 3, you'll find a way to bring in more abundance, financial abundance, doing what you love versus collecting this paycheck. Because I know when I finally made the leap into entrepreneurship, I was not in a financial position to do so, but I knew the only way I'm going to make more money or make this passion profitable is to get rid of the 9 to 5, get rid of the structure, and go all in. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of like, I remember my sister saying to me, Ashley, give it a try. If it doesn't work out, you just go get another job. If it doesn't work out, you just do something else.
It's like, what's the worst that could happen?
Right. You have a few rough months, which, I mean, you can have a few rough months even with a job. So
you can have a few rough years with a job.
Exactly. Rough decade or two, I mean. But yeah, so you just have to have faith. And I think for me, where it began was just having a really strong vision of what this end result would look like. Like I was so just driven by this huge, amazing dream of a life and a career that it gave me the strength to make tough decisions. At times when, my inner saboteur was saying, don't do this and wait, and it's not the right timing. It was like, no, if you want this, you got to take action.
I want to go back to the whole formulating the dream and going after the dream, because I think we have all this information at our fingertips, but it's not going to search for you. Like, you have to know what you're looking for. So I want to go back to that. But I do have a question about, you were saying putting yourself out there, which I want to ask about that because I think a lot of people, young, old, for whatever reasons, they may be afraid to put themselves out there, whether it's in person or on social media, for a number of reasons. And also having the self-awareness to know what works for you when putting yourself out there versus like the things that don't work for you. So how did you, was it like a one aha moment, or was it more gradual of like putting yourself out there more and more? Because I think that sometimes there's the nerves right there, and there's like people's expectations, or you build things up of how people are going to react, and then sometimes it's not as bad, or it's actually more positive. And then also, how did you figure out, because you are a public speaker, I've always been speaking, I knew how to do this, or as you're putting yourself out there more and trying different things, you figured out what worked and what didn't. So how did those two things work for you? Just, was it a gradual change, and was it instant for putting yourself out there, and then finding out what worked for you when putting yourself out there?
It was not an instant thing. I really started just by like pursuing my desire to want to help others. And I did that by being a silent behind the scenes volunteer at a domestic violence agency. I did not think about telling my story, writing a blog post, anything like that. And this was pre-social media essentially. So, that wasn't even an option. But that domestic violence agency asked me if I would speak at their annual event that they held to honor domestic violence homicide victims. And I was terrified. Like, I was excited because I felt like it was part of this new mission of mine to raise awareness, but I was also terrified at the idea of sharing something so vulnerable. And in my head, like you were just saying, I kept thinking, I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be criticized, like the mayor is going to be in the audience, my peers. And I was really nervous as to what they were going to think of me when I shared this story. And it's like you just mentioned, it was the exact opposite. I mean, people came up afterwards and they related, they shared their own similar circumstances, they thanked me for my courage, for my strength, and that really kind of validated the importance of getting out of my own way and seeing my life's experiences as tools and a way to help people. And so I wasn't like confident overnight, but it was just slowly putting myself out there more and more, saying yes to more opportunities, teasing out a little bit here or there on a blog. And you just take these, baby steps, and, eventually you just find more confidence, and you see that, for the most part, the response is usually mostly positive. And if it's not, it's like the older you get, you start to realize that if somebody has something negative to say, good chance it's a reflection of them and something going on in their life. And you just have to learn to let those things go. And I had been a victim of letting people's opinions run my life for so long that now I was like, well, you know what? If you don't like what I have to say, I don't even care.
Quick question on that. Would you say it's also sometimes important to not get caught up on the positive opinions as well? Just, because sometimes see like people get addicted to the likes and the adulation. So is it important to kind of, I guess, keep it even? Like, yes, it's great that there's positive feedback, but is there a possible danger of like, don't get too addicted to it? Because then there might be the day when it's not positive feedback or there's just no feedback.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we live in a time where people do chase, positive affirmations online. You start to question why this post only got 75 likes versus another one. And we can get really insecure. We can compare ourselves. But I think that when you really look at the root of it, and this is something, I've done in my own personal development, is seeing that I try to avoid criticism, because for the last decade, almost everything I've done has been over the top, like amazing success. I've had praise. So now it's like, I don't want to put anything out there that undoes that. And so I think a lot of times, seeking praise too much puts us in this space where we are now essentially still just seeking acceptance and to please people and to not be judged or criticized. But, on the road to anyone's success is going to be criticism. So yeah, it's accepting the positive with the negative.
Could that stunt your, I guess, business and creative growth as well? Because you may fall into a mindset where you only want to, like, it's almost like a shut up and play the hits mindset. You don't want to try anything new because that thing may get criticism, where you keep going back to the well of, well, I know people like this, so I'm going to keep doing this one thing, rather than...
Yeah, it gets stale and it gets old. And, like from a music perspective, it's like you look at some artists that have survived through the decades and they've reinvented their music style and everything they do. It's like Madonna, you could put her into a million different music categories, and it's always about taking that risk and doing something new and putting yourself out there, because if you do the same old thing day after day, year after year, it's just going to stop working. It's going to fall flat, and there's no depth. And people, I think, crave depth. So somebody wants to follow someone who at times is controversial or, changes their own thoughts and perspectives. So you do have to have that balance between what works and gets likes, but also I think, like, we're talking about creatives, it's being intuitive too, and thinking, how am I feeling today and what do I want to authentically express, whether I know that's going to get me likes or not, because that's us living from our place of purpose and authenticity, which essentially is going to, in the long run, attract the people that belong within our community, that value who we are and love what we do and what we put out.
Did you try things other than like when you were in the process of putting yourself out there and kind of just on this road to discovery, did you try other things or other mediums besides public speaking and writing, which you are good at and found that you were good at? So did you try other stuff that you found you were not good at or didn't work out as well? And I guess, what was the moment of like, I'm going to leave this alone, this is not my thing? And did you learn anything from it?
So I ended up going back to school and studying criminal justice. So I did go into the field, and I got to try on different jobs. And I definitely realized that I didn't like being in a position where I didn't have autonomy, where I couldn't contribute, like, from a leadership perspective, to see an inefficiency and change a system. So positions that kind of just expected me to, like, here's your 5 daily tasks, do them and get paid, I really didn't like it.
How long did that take? Because you said you went back to school, studied criminal justice. How long did it take for you to be like, yeah, this is not fair? Because that could have been your thing, and we could be having a totally different conversation right now, but it wasn't. But where was the point for you personally that you were like, oh, yeah, I know I went back to school and studied this, and it's great I went back to school, but this is not for me? Was it like a cutoff point, or was it just more, as the more you did it was a vibe you got, and you're just like, this isn't me?
I've always felt within me that I wanted to be my own boss, but I think a lot of times it was this illusory, like, someday when I'm older and I have this company and employees, and I never really thought about just being self-employed younger. And, even though I went back to school and had traditional jobs and then left, my education is still related to what I do today, because I studied criminal justice. I went into the field of victim services and advocacy and legal communications. So, like, it's supported my background and my resume now as an expert in what I speak on. But honestly, I just got to a point where, like, I knew I wanted to become an entrepreneur sooner than later. I was still speaking part-time on the side. Like, I had small side hustles that I knew eventually could take over my full-time profession. But I got to a point where I just wasn't making enough money. I asked for a raise and it wasn't in our budget. And I kind of just thought, you know what, then now's the time for me just to make the leap. I'd been promoted. I was in one of the highest positions in the office. And that was great, but I just felt like there's still so much more. And, I'm a firm like believer that, life is very short. And I just thought I'm wasting my life like when I'm clocking in every day. And, what impact could I make on the world if I got this structure out of the way? And, in my field of work, I was on the response end of things where we were just responding to crime all day.
So it's reactionary it's reactive rather than proactive.
Yeah. And I was like, how can I be at the forefront of change? And how can I do something that's more positive? And so for me, that was, okay, take this side hustle, make it full time, and really try to establish yourself as a leader, and make an even bigger impact than you ever can, in this 9-to-5, 40-hour week job.
So wanted to circle back of, you had this dream in mind. And some people, it hits them like a lightning bolt. It's like, I got this dream, I'm going to go after it. Some people, it takes a while. How did you formulate your dream? Because I think that's something that when I look at either media or social media, I don't think a lot of people touch upon how they formulate. It's just like, I had this dream and I started this company. Great, you just woke up one day? Like, how did that happen? So how did that happen for you? And how did you go from like getting it into a dream where it was like something in your head to then it was like a mission statement, a goal, and then planning to go after? Like, what was that process like for you? Because I think that could help a lot of people who are listening to this.
Yeah. When my life was pretty like desolate and had nothing positive going on, I think I just trusted in this little feeling in my gut that like there was more meant for me. And I think that's all I needed to begin, was just knowing that I wanted more, knowing that I felt I was meant for more. And, I say I had this dream and I was willing to just, hit the ground running and go after it. I didn't have the details. I didn't know exactly what the dream was. I just knew that I wanted to make a difference and be impactful. And I think just by like committing to that, like saying, yes, this is the vision I have, the feeling I have, and I'm just going to start following this feeling no matter what it takes. Suddenly, it's like the universe hears these little signals, and suddenly there's this domestic violence volunteer opportunity. And then they're giving me a stage to speak on. So it's like little things start to come your way when you give yourself the permission to start being open to new opportunities. So, that was one. And then I think from there, a lot of people get caught up on like, what are all the steps I have to take? And, what would make me money? And people like try to put on this business hat. And we fail to just like listen to our intuition. And I think that's like really important when it comes to entrepreneurship, is people tend to get into this whole space of being action oriented and like sales funnels and websites, and all that's important. But you've got to have a feeling in your heart and in your own faith in yourself that there's more meant out there for you. And, I mentioned that like I took a few years before I went back to school. I spent time getting to know me and realizing what it is that I love, right? And I realized one of the things I love is starting my day with a cup of coffee at the coffee shop and having time to myself. And I used to think on Monday mornings, I'd rush into the cafe on my way to the office at like 8:45. And I used to think, what if I could just sit here and read the paper and not be tied to a clock? And that was like one little idea of like, that's part of my dream life. Or I would go on a vacation and think, wow, people live here, like by the beach, and they take long lunch breaks and they surf if it's good surf weather, and they just take the day off early. I'm like, how can I make this my life? And you start to just think like, if I could consciously design my dream life, or like if I could get paid to do something that I would do for free, what would that be? And there is a way to monetize all of it and to design this lifestyle. And I just knew that I would somehow figure it out someday. So yeah, you have faith in that little gut instinct that there's more meant for you. And then you start to learn what you like, what you don't. And you think, how can I make this, my life and my business all in one?
So when you're talking about building that dream life and you're going, hey, people live here and and like this is their life, do you think it's important to maybe when you're going through this process of thinking about like what that dream life could be, really ask the hard question of what do you really want and what's important versus what you're told that you want and what's important? Because I think that sometimes happens too. Like we and by we I just mean people in general get caught up in this like keeping up with the Joneses kind of mentality of I have to have a new car or I have to have a new thing. Did that ever, like, was there any process of decoupling for that, or were you just that was never a part of your mindset to begin with?
I think what worked to my advantage is that I had already taken a pretty unconventional path. I was already graduating from college years after my peers, so I think it helped me a little bit because I wasn't departing from, the what's prescribed.
You were already off the beaten path anyway, so it didn't matter.
Right. But honestly, even nowadays, it's like, a few decades ago, you wanted to get married by the time you were 24 and you were having kids and buying a house already. And I just don't think timelines apply to where we are in the world.
That seems insane to me because I'm thinking back to 24-year-old me and I'm like, 24-year-old me should not be allowed to have any kids. I'm 34 now and I shouldn't be allowed to have any kids. That's a different podcast and a different story altogether. But, so you were already off the beaten path, and so that way there was no like having to deprogram and be like, oh, what do I really want? Okay, gotcha.
I think just like one more like tactical thing on that. So one of the things that I would do is I would take a pen and paper and I would ask myself, like, if there were no rules, right? If you could live your dream life every day, what would an average day look like? And I think if you just write without thinking, like you just let your thoughts flow on paper, it's sometimes amazing to see what you write down, the things that you don't even think to include in it. So I think that can be like a really simple practice for anyone listening is like, if you don't really know what you want, just think if there were no rules, if, I didn't have any of the constructs in my life right now and I could design my perfect average ideal day, like what would every minute of it look like, and just write freely. And sometimes that just gets your creative gears going and it gets you inspired and you start to kind of figure out what the path could look like and seeing a different way of living.
So going back to the introduction of, turning a tragedy into triumph, and it was amazing that you did that. Why do you think that there are some out there that unfortunately and tragically they cannot turn, or I don't want to say they can't, but it ends up that they don't end up turning the tragedy into triumph. They fall by the wayside, they slip through the cracks, or they give up, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think some of the reasons are where that turnaround, that change doesn't happen? And what advice would you give to others, whether they are victims of abuse or they're going through some other rough circumstance of that they can do it? What would the advice be, and why do you think that happens?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to that. I mean, if people have gone through a lot of trauma or hardship, or they've had toxic life dynamics and relationships, that creates a lot of like mental conditioning and programming where you think you have to live life a certain way. And so I think for survivors or really anybody coming out of any difficult life circumstances, you have people in two different like trains of thought. You have people who suddenly see all the opportunities and how these hardships have happened for them to empower them. And then you have other people who all they can see is the limitations, right? Like a lot of times we'll call this victim mindset. And so it's really just a matter of changing your perspective to say, how is this helping me? What opportunities are here? Like, how have I grown from these experiences, or why have they happened to me? And, unfortunately, a lot of people, without some type of like therapeutic support or counseling can't always make that shift. So like, that's always my advice. I've been able to kind of like self-heal and self-counsel over the years, but for people that are having a hard time breaking out of patterns and finding themselves in the same cycle, or not finding the belief in themselves that they can change things, I always recommend that they go to therapy or a counselor, because a lot of times it's just finding ways to better retrain your thoughts and to manage and regulate your emotions so that you can now make choices that are aligned with your goals and your results in life that you want. Because a lot of times the reality is we have these desires and these big dreams, but our actions are so misaligned with them. So it's just figuring out, why am I not taking the right action steps? And talking to someone can really help.
So speaking of talking to somebody can help, there was a video clip for a local news piece on your public speaking work, and I think it was in particular for work you've done with high schools. And in that little news story, there was a young woman that had stated it was not until after you had went and talked to the school that she realized she was a victim of abuse. So I think it's good that you helped her realize that. But then I want to ask the question, is there a way, or is there something about a public speaker, or maybe something you particularly did that made her realize it, versus what she would, the sources of information that she had access to already, such as print, online, social media, news. Is there something that a public speaker can do from, I guess, maybe a human connection standpoint that made her realize that actualization? So I wanted to ask about that, because I thought that was pretty interesting, that it took you speaking at the school, and then it was, oh, holy crap, I'm a victim of this abuse.
Yeah, I think, throughout the archives of time, there's power in storytelling. We've always relied on storytelling to teach lessons and share wisdom and knowledge. And I think you can read something in a textbook, you can read a blog post, but when you are sitting in an audience and you're struggling with something in life and you feel like your situation's unique, different, no one can really get it, your friends and family don't get it, and then someone is on stage and you feel like they are speaking your life story, it's so, validating that what you're going through is not so unique that it's inescapable. And I think then also hearing that person who once felt just like you do in this moment moved on and now is able to achieve this amazing level of happiness, fulfillment, and accomplishment in life, it's really empowering and inspiring. And, you can't always get that from just reading a little social media graphic that says, 4 signs you're being abused. And for me personally, before I had dropped out of college, we actually had a guest speaker come into one of my classrooms that was presenting on domestic violence, and my life was on a PowerPoint slide. And I had never once attributed the words domestic violence to what I was going through, because in my head, I would never fall in love with a batterer. I would never let myself be a victim, but there it was, clear as day. And so, yeah, there's something about real life stories where you feel validated. It creates a sense of solidarity. And then you can ask for real life advice on how to get out of something. And that's, also part of what I share. So it's an amazing line of work. It's a different line of work, but I mean, those stories come, almost every time I speak, where someone then goes and seeks help or counseling or starts safety planning to leave their abusive partner, or just starts to change their life.
Would you say that that's even then more of a reason for people to try different things and figure out the platform or the way of telling their story is even more important? Because you might not get all the likes, you might not even make any money at it, but whatever you do to tell your story and put yourself out there, that could maybe help somebody else. Would you say that that's even more of an urgency then, to go put yourself out there and try telling your story, no matter how you actually do it?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be, a level of comfort as to what you want to share, but I would be willing to argue that if every person took a moment to just write out a blog post, a social media post sharing their story, at least one person would thank them, at least one person would say, your words meant everything to me today, there's a saying that what's most personal is most universal. And I think a lot of people keep their story out of their brand, their picture, when really that's what people connect to. So I would encourage people, it's like, you don't have to get on a stage and publicly speak. You can write a blog post, you can do social media, you can get on a podcast and tell your story. There's so many different outlets that you can choose. And I think even from a business perspective, it's like you might have a product-based company, and a lot of people don't even include like their story or their inspiration or why they decided to create this product. And I think that's the difference between brands that people love, trust, remember, connect to versus those that people don't. So I think in life and in business, it's a really good practice to find ways to infuse, authenticity and your real life story.
It's crazy you mentioned that, because I remember there was an old interview with the CEO of Coca-Cola at the time. This was years ago. And he said, we're not in the selling soda business. And the interviewer's like, the heck are you talking about? He's like, we're in the selling nostalgia business. He's like, what we do is when we sell you a Coca-Cola, we're selling you when you had one as a kid with your parents, or you went to the ball game, or you had it on the beach or something like that. He's like, we're not in the selling soda business. We're in the selling nostalgia business. So it's interesting that you mentioned, like, if you're going to put out a product, put out the story and the thing around it, because that's what people are going to connect with to buy the product or buy the service.
Yeah. Or like the values of your brand or your company or your product. Like those are the things that are the intangibles that people like. That's why they're going to choose, your clothing company over another clothing company.
It's going to be a really weird quote to tie this in, but if you ever seen the movie Tommy Boy, like I think David Spade's character makes a joke. He's like, well, Tommy, they're not, in a way, these people are buying you, not the brake pads, and that's really what it is. Like, people are buying you, like whether you're in sales or whether you don't want to think that you're in sales, like they're buying you, or they're buying the image or the representation you're putting out there. The product is just the part of the transaction, but they're really buying the thing you're putting out there, or the version of you're putting out there.
Right. So, it's like, now there's a proliferation of life coaches online. Like, how do you pick the one that you want to work with? You're going to pick the one that you relate to.
I want to get into that later, because I got some thoughts and some questions on it, and I want to hear your honest thoughts on it too.
I also do.
Good, because there's, boy, it's all I'm going to say is I hope it gets more interesting when I pose that question. But I'm going to hold off for now, just because I want to go with the flow. A lesson for life, creativity, and business is to be your authentic self. When Ashley was free to ask herself the question of who she was and what she wanted, it started her journey of self-discovery, and she discovered her authentic self. That self led her to become a subject matter expert in abuse prevention, and realize her career as a public speaker, and to go after the life she envisioned. By presenting her authentic self, people sought out Ashley not only for her public speaking, but also for her business acumen, which led her to becoming a coach. Finding and becoming your authentic self can help guide you on the career and life you desire. And presenting your authentic self through your work can help make a connection with your audience and stand out from the crowd. Talk about your first time public speaking. And how you were working one role more behind the scenes, and then you got asked to do it, and you did it. And then turned out well, obviously, because then you did it more. When it came to being a public speaker, so from what you had said earlier, that wasn't from the angle, like, I'm going to be a public speaker and share the story. It's an event happened, you went, you did it. Were there more events like that? Was it that one event and you're like, I could be good at this? Or was it more, what turned you on to the idea of, like, I can be a public speaker and people make a living this way? like what turned you on to that idea? And were there other roles that you did that turned you on to it? Or was it just more, you kind of researched it more and found out that was a way to make a living?
When that first time I told my story, actually people in that audience ended up asking me to speak elsewhere in the community. So it was like the local Boys and Girls Club director was there, and he asked me to speak to the after school like girls group. So I just started to get these organic requests throughout my community. And honestly, I saw me sharing my story as almost like an act of community service. It was me donating my time, speaking wherever I could, and raising awareness. And I did this for like, I want to say 2 or 3 years. And then one day I was doing a high school assembly, and the organizer said to me, "Oh, this is amazing. We're so grateful that you did this for free. The other guy that we were considering hiring was going to charge us $2,000. And my jaw dropped. I was like, $2,000? I mean, I had never, one, even realized that speakers got paid because I was young and just didn't know this whole world yet. And two, like part of me was like, how does one ask for that much money to tell their story? It seemed so like not virtuous. What I was doing was virtuous because I was donating. But it definitely like sparked the idea that some people get paid doing this and they get paid very well doing this. I'm like, that is like 2 to 3 weeks salary, depending on, what job I've had at the time. And so I didn't like instantly go create a fee structure or come up with pricing, but it did start to get me thinking and researching, and I started Googling paid speakers. And eventually over time, and it did take a little time, I started to work up like the courage to ask for a little bit of money. And then before I knew it, I was asking for thousands of dollars for one keynote. And it's just like, I think for a while I mentioned I was speaking part-time. So, I'd speak half a dozen times in a year, maybe 10 times in a year for like $2,000 a pop. But I was like, well, all I got to do is like quit my job and book 2 or 3 of these a month, or increase my prices and do 1 to 2 a month, and I'm making my current salary. And so I just kind of built it up on the side, realized what worked, what didn't, what good price ranges were, and how to better like package and present my story in a way where it was like a highly valued, high paid product. And now this is what I do full time. So it's been an interesting journey, and one that I like never expected would be a career path.
So are there misconceptions in the general public about what a public speaker actually does and what their day-to-day is like? I know I've had some.
Mm-hmm.
I've both, at least years ago, if I heard the word public speaker, I would think like, I think Tony Robbins is his name. Like I would think him, or I would think there's that, it was like a dark comedy or a drama. It was like Tom Cruise was like a public motivational speaker or something like that. Those were the images in my head of public speakers. Obviously that's changed. But are there misconceptions like that? Are there some that, there's some truth to it? Are there some that you're just like, no, that's not how any of this works? If you want to dispel any of those. Was there an image in your head before you started speaking that you thought public speakers were one thing?
I do. I think like a lot of people will say like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a professional full-time speaker. And they're like, oh, like a motivational speaker? And I'm like, no. And there's nothing wrong with being a motivational speaker. I am a motivational speaker, but there's more context to it than that. And I think, for me, you do have this image of like, honestly, like a man on stage that's like in your face, like yelling things out.
The power of you!
Yeah, like a little bit preachery at times, and just like, to me, and some people love speakers like that, and I don't. But I think a lot of people, that's what they think of. They think of somebody who just gets up there and says these like canned phrases like, you can do it no matter what you've been through. You can see what's a possibility versus what's a limitation. And yeah, I say all those things, but there's depth to it. And you
got some life experience to go with it. It's not just saying the things for the sake of saying the things.
Yeah, and I think like me going into like the industry of like domestic violence audiences and schools, it kind of makes you think of like old assembly speakers when you were in high school, where somebody would get up on the stage and
that was one of the images in my head.
Yeah, they have this like heart-wrenching story, or like they lost their kid to suicide, and like, so there's like a specialized like group of speakers that are experts on a certain topic. Like in the youth world, which is where I primarily speak, they pay for prevention. So, I'm an expert now in domestic and sexual violence prevention. But I also I train the military a few times a year on how to prevent sexual assault on base. I train first responders and victim services professionals on like the neuroscience of trauma. So I'm a speaker, but I have a whole specialized background. And so I think, there's this misconception that I just get up on stage and I'm high energy and positive and just get everybody cheering. But honestly, the most impactful and motivational speeches I give are the ones that induce tears and have the audience like moved and thinking about themselves differently and feeling less alone. And there's an art to it too. It's like I share a story of, years of abusive relationships, but I'll flip it on an audience and say, I went through this, but, like the feelings of aloneness, sadness, depression, that can be triggered by anything. Maybe it's family dynamics. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's you're struggling with mental health issues. We all share these feelings. So how do we move past them? And so there's like this art to being a really good speaker. And I think people don't think that. People think, oh, she gets paid $4,000 just to go talk for 45 minutes. But I mean, it's a whole decade's worth of research, life experience, field experience, and a lot of preparation to deliver a $4,000 speech. So, and of course, travel and time and all the other things that go into it. And the bulk of the daily work of a professional speaker it's sales all day. Like I'm on the phone making sales calls, introducing myself, marketing myself. So it's not like we just work 2 days a week and, get paid bank. I mean, there's a lot of, back end like legwork that goes into it.
I want to go into that in a little bit too, because I have some questions on that. But staying on the public speaker thing, what do you think are, besides being able to go up in front of a number of people and be able to speak properly, what do you think are the skills that go into a good public speaker versus a bad one? Like, how would you identify a good public speaker versus a bad one? What skills are necessary to be a good public speaker? If somebody's listening to this, like, what should they really work on? And then if you are an organization or a group or a business that wants to hire a public speaker, what should they look for? So I guess it's a 3-part question. It's more what makes a good public speaker versus a bad, what skills are necessary for a good public speaker, and then what should a business or organization or a group look for when hiring a public speaker?
Yeah, I think so difference between a good and a bad speaker. Well, let's say a not great speaker, they're too focused on them and their story, and they think that they're getting paid to tell their story. And sometimes that's the truth, but for the most part, it's not. So a good speaker knows how to take their story, which is very specific, but make it universal. So it's not about you. It's about you using your story, your experiences as a tool to reach the audience. So not me getting up there and saying, I did this and I did that and I have a PhD in this. And a lot of speakers will do that. They'll get up and they're lofty speakers that just sing all their praises and talk about them. And the audience is left saying, so what? Or like, why do I care about this? So or
maybe they might be like, well, great, now I'm depressed.
Yeah.
Right. Like now I feel awful. So like,
right.
What did I got nothing out of this besides I feel bad now.
Yeah. So a good speaker will find a way to use their stories to make it relevant to the audience. And then they will give them practical skills in some way, or some like, here's a 3-step process, or here's 3 things to think about if you want to start doing this. So you've got to give them something tangible. And I think that answers your second question.
It does.
What skills does it take? You have to know your audience, and you have to know the goals of the buyer. And so in the speaker world, your audience is the person in the seat. Your buyer, your client, is the person that pays you. So it's really understanding what their goals are. You have to do your research on a community, a company, what their mission is, what a sorority's values are, and really infuse all of that so that they feel like you're the speaker that was made for their audience. And I think as someone who books speakers, you don't want to just find somebody who's got a great story and a great website or a great social media following. You want to make sure that they can deeply connect with your audience in a way that's going to transform them in some way. And that means, them understanding you and your goals and finding ways to cater their presentation to what your objectives are.
So going along with that, I've noticed from doing my homework and my research that you have a almost like a multi-pronged approach when it comes to your public speaking, which I think is awesome. Like it's not just one facet of the story, it's different things. So talking to people who are victims, talking to the people who are bystanders and watching abuse happen, but like what can they do so they're not just a bystander and they can actively change the situation and make it better. Again, training with the military, training with first responders, training with dads, which I thought was a really interesting one. And I think you're the only one I've seen, at least just from what I've seen, do that, which I thought like it was one of those like, why has somebody not done that before? That's brilliant. So how did you formulate it's like almost like this multi-pronged approach? Was that something that you were doing from the get-go, or is that something that formulated over time? Like you saw a certain like the dads thing. Was that something that over time you noticed, like, oh, dads could probably use some of this training too, especially if they're raising sons, and or daughters, or if they're a single dad, maybe even more important. How did you formulate that approach of like hitting all these different areas rather than just one specific lane, so to speak?
Yeah, I think a big mistake that any entrepreneur makes is sometimes they come up with this like huge menu of services from like day one, because you think someday you want this business where you have this robust like menu of offerings. But the best advice I have is starting out in any creative endeavor, you want to pick a lane. You want to pick one signature thing that you do. So for me, I focused on student assemblies. That's where I began. And then over the years, as I was speaking, I would get a request. Hey, can you do something for our faculty and staff? Hey, can you do a parent workshop? Hey, can you do something just for girls? And so the more I just kind of went throughout my career, I started to form these little extra things and see where there were needs. And anything that seemed to be like desirable pretty consistently, I would just add into like what I offer. And some of it is just like one-off. I was just inspired to do this kind of stuff. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I have been getting messages from grown men for years asking like, hey, Ashley, love the work you're doing. Oh, like it kind of terrifies me. I have daughters. What advice do you have? And I was like, why don't I host a virtual workshop for dads raising daughters? And so it just kind of came to me. And honestly, some of my best business ideas are the ones that come to me like in the shower or minutes before I go to bed. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to trust that like I had this idea for a reason, and you just put it out there. So yeah, I threw together the dad workshop and gave it a few weeks to promote, and it was great. I loved doing it. And now I'm like, maybe I'll make this an evergreen product where people can just buy it on the website and go through it themselves. So yeah, you just, I think like there's a lot of value in picking a niche or a niche, depending on who's listening, because then you start to find ways to like create these little offshoot products from this area that you specialize in.
Would you say being open though too, like, hey, I got this one lane I'm in, but being open to branching out a little bit if you're starting to, because I think would it be tough to see those opportunities if you're not open to it?
Yeah, totally. I think be open to opportunities and then just trust what your intuition says. It's like I'll get requests for a random speech like, hey, can you do a talk just on self-care in the time of COVID? Or can you do a talk on social entrepreneurship and how to start a nonprofit? And sometimes it's just a matter of, well, yes, I can, but I don't have the energy, or I just, that's a whole custom presentation. So yeah, but sometimes you say yes to something and you realize this is a hit, this new presentation that somebody asked me to do, and now I'm like pitching it everywhere. So yeah, be open to things. But I think from a personal perspective, being strategic is really important. So like focusing your own marketing and creative efforts down a lane, but when things come along, being open to them too.
What is the more behind the scenes, the more quote unquote boring stuff of being a public speaker? I guess not boring for this, because like this is the stuff that I do want to talk about, and I like talking about with people because I don't think it gets covered enough. But what is the business of being a public speaker? For example, somebody offered you money and then you were like, I'm going to start researching more about getting paid for this. Like how are fees set up? Like how did you set up what you charged? Did you do price increases? What was the justification of increasing the price? Going into offering more services, this coming up with the services that you offered, and then also, is every public speaker in business for themselves, or do they go through platforms or agencies like that help get them jobs or gigs or whatnot. Do public speakers have managers? Like, I don't know any of this. And I'm guessing there are people out there who don't know this as well. So if somebody wants to be a public speaker, what are some of those more behind the business things? And is every single person in business for themselves? Are they part of a larger company? Can it be either or?
Yeah, this is something I've learned over many years. So most speakers are independent, doing their own marketing, booking, sales, contracts, paperwork, all of that. It's rare that a speaker is like represented where they have somebody doing all of that on their behalf. And a lot of speakers will think, well, can't I just hire someone to do sales calls? And for the most part, statistically, it just doesn't book someone as often as a person reaching out on their own. So the bulk of the work, honestly, is sales calls and sales outreach every day. And you have to do it consistently. It is a numbers game. You know, I might call 100 high schools before 10 even say, yes, we book speakers, and 3 actually sign a contract.
Is it pretty much straight up cold calling, or?
In my industry, yeah. Okay. I mean, some people do cold emails all day, but I've found that I get more of a response with calls to
Gotcha.
schools. But it's cold outreach, whether it's emails, phone calls, or social media messages. You just have to introduce yourself to people because, like any business, you can't just make a great website or a great product and expect people to find you. You have to introduce yourself to people or create visibility in other ways. So as far as like fees, when I first began, I had, just like I was talking about, you know, people make a mistake of having a whole menu of services. I had a whole menu of fees. Like if you're an association, it's this price. If you're a corporation, it's this price. If you're a middle school, it's this price. It was so much. So now so I have an agency now, and I'll get into that in a moment. But now I just have 2 prices. It's my single keynote. This is the price. And then package 2 would be like 2 presentations plus a training plus a workshop or whatever for this flat price. And simplifying my fees and what I offer has just been like game changing in my business. So yeah, it's a matter of like, I'll use Fiverr. So like little inside tips. I'll use someone on Fiverr and have them create an Excel spreadsheet of contact information. Because that's the most time consuming, most boring part is like, okay, I want to target all the schools in, you know, Providence County. But you have to go to every website. You have to look up the principal name.
Dig through it, save all that stuff.
It's awful. Whereas I can pay someone $50 on Fiverr, and in 2 days I have a whole spreadsheet and I can make calls and send emails. So that's like a bulk of the work, and that's how most speakers start to fill their calendar up. But then the other piece nowadays is like, I'll get myself onto podcasts. I will guest blog. I'll just write articles about teen dating violence and pitch it to parenting magazines. And I find different ways to get myself out there. And, you know, I was on one podcast a few years ago, and it's now like the #1 true crime podcast on iTunes. And I've gotten speaking leads out of it. You know, I flew to Philadelphia a year and a half ago, and that was a lead from going on that podcast. So it's really just like a daily battle of trying to create visibility and letting people know you exist and know what you offer.
Before you get into the agency things, I think that's interesting. You were saying that you would go on to Fiverr and have somebody pull all that content information for you. Were you doing everything in the beginning, like everything yourself? And what helped you determine the stuff that, okay, this is taking up too much of my time and it's not really adding value, I should offload? Like, how did you determine what to offload and what to keep as far as day to day?
I'm still going through like the evolution of that process. So I think for me, it's always been a no-brainer to outsource something that doesn't require my creative input. So like data collection, yeah, I'm going to pay someone to do that. Now I'm finally getting to a point where it's like, okay, I would outsource some of my website design. Like I've learned to do everything on my own, from like building a website to sales funnels. I've learned how to do this, so I know how, and I know how to do it well. And there's sometimes like a perfectionist in me that doesn't want to let that stuff go because what if they don't do it as good as I would? But I'm getting to a point where it's like, in order for me to be the quote unquote CEO of my business, I shouldn't be wasting my time doing like $10 an hour tasks, $25 an hour tasks. I need to focus on business development and the creative piece, which I think is probably what a lot of your listeners can relate to, is like, I want to create and have like people under me that can do all the administrative stuff. And you get to a point where you can find ways to like really reasonably and affordably do that. So yeah, I think as you grow, that happens in like baby steps.
Does it always have to be people? Because I feel like there's maybe platforms or services out there that can do these things as well, and it might be cheaper than actually looking for a person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many entrepreneurs out there these days that there's like apps for anything you could possibly need. There's easy graphic design software. I mean, yeah, it doesn't take a lot of money at all.
And would you say also, maybe it's the whole, what do you have more of, money versus time? Because I think in the beginning, maybe if you're starting out, you have time, but maybe not money. Or if you're short on time, then you have to be like, do you think it's a balance of that as well? What do you have more abundance of to put towards what to offload and what not to offload?
Yeah, I think sometimes, I think it's a mix. I mean, I think you don't want to make a decision that's going to put you in a financial hole, but I think sometimes people think, well, once my business is making 6 figures, then I can hire a VA. But it's like, well, if you hired a VA right now, you might be able to advance yourself to 6 figures in 6 months because now you're focusing on bigger ticket, business building. So I think sometimes you realize like your growth and your income is thwarted by you spending so much time on these little things. So sometimes it's like if you can afford it, or if like $100 today, they're going to save 10 hours out of this month and I'm going to make that 100 back. You can kind of do the math and realize that like it'll come right back around.
So what is the whole agency when it comes to public speakers? Because I didn't even know there were agencies for that. Like what is the agency you're a part of? What is the role of an agency when it comes to public speaking? And then do they reach out to you? Do you reach out to agencies? Like, how does that all work? And I guess maybe also a good agency from a not so good agency.
Yeah, so there's a good number of speaker agencies, also known as speaker bureaus. And for the most part, they all operate the same, where you kind of apply to be a listed talent on their website, and it gives you some, accolades that you can share that you're part of this bureau. But most bureaus are not going to bat for you. They are not putting money into you. The only time that'll work is if you get signed by a bureau and you're like some level of celebrity. Then they'll really pitch you to things. But for somebody like me who doesn't have this national celebrity status, if I join a bureau, I'm not going to get any real support from them other than I'm listed on their website. Because I speak in the youth market, there's only a few youth speakers bureaus, and the one that I'm on is like the unicorn of speakers bureaus. There's only 21 of us speakers. They found me, like they reached out and acquired me, and they're really specific about who they bring on because it's such a tight-knit group, and they actually do 100% dump money into marketing each of us. Right before COVID, they had a film crew that was going to fly out to one of my gigs and record like a high-quality demo video. I just got so lucky with this agency. So they do bring me leads. In a normal year, I don't need to do a ton of marketing for myself at all because they just have leads coming in. So I got really lucky with them. I mean, this bureau is so amazing that right after I signed, they have this annual family retreat for our speaker family in Mexico. And I went to Mexico, and that's how I met everybody. So I got lucky, but most bureaus are not like that. Most, you have to apply, and if they accept you, you're really just a talent listing on their website. So your best bet if you want to speak is to really get great at the business of it, at selling yourself. And then down the road, hopefully as you grow, you find this small niche speakers bureau that can really work with you.
So even with the agency, it's helping you land gigs, but you're still doing a lot of cold calls and stuff yourself. So it's not the only thing. It's just part of the stream of getting gigs. Am I understanding that correctly? Correct.
I think the one thing that I don't have to handle at all is the paperwork, the contracts, the invoicing, the collecting money. When I have a lead that I send to my agent, they handle all the documentation. So for me, it's just getting on the phone, selling myself, and then showing up to speak. So that's that's a huge piece that I've really enjoyed, is like I don't have to spend hours setting up the contract, writing up all the documents, sending invoices, or worse, like chasing down money or doing negotiations. Like they handle all of that for me. So that's a big perk.
So once again, it's the offloading thing. It's like stuff that you don't have to deal with now, because now you can work on the stuff that takes your creative energy rather than just energy in general.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really cool about the bureau that I'm with, is that's their whole perspective, is you should have time to create and grow your product base, and we're going to handle all the back end, and it's a win-win for both.
Speaking of how that agency reached out to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to touch upon this. Hopefully you're able to talk about it. If not, let me know. You had an experience where a company or organization, I'm not sure of which, reached out to you for podcasting, and it didn't work. And I'm just, because I think it's a good segue.
Yes.
But I want to touch upon it because I think, especially on like things like social media, like people make posts or they post their songs or their work, and then they get these like fly by night, like especially I think when it comes to music, hey, really liked your thing, like you should come, pay us for our fees, we can help grow your whatever, grow your channel, grow your music. And I'm not saying they're all not legitimate, but there are probably a lot out there that aren't legitimate, and they're just taking people for a ride. And so the reason why I wanted to touch upon this whole podcast thing that happened to you is, one, to share that experience, and if you can't talk about it, that's fine, but if you can, what can you share about how that all went down? What did you learn from it? And what advice would you give when these companies like reach out to you like that? How to discern from like, oh, this is like a thing that's actually going to help me grow, versus they just want to take my money and not give me any value?
Yeah, I think...
Okay, before Ashley answers the question and goes into her podcast story, I figured this is the perfect time for an ad. An ad for Anchor. Anchor is the platform for podcasts all the way from recording to publishing and everything in between. Anchor is a vital tool for a one-man podcast show like this one. With Anchor, you can record and edit your podcast, add background and transition music, insert ads like the one you are hearing now, and best of all, in my humble opinion, clicking one button will publish your podcast to all the major podcast platforms simultaneously. Hell, there's even a mobile app where you can do all this on the go from your phone. Oh, and best of all, it's free. Yeah, free. I've been using Anchor to make the podcast you're listening to right now, and I've never been charged a dime. So if you want to start a podcast and start telling your story, start today with Anchor. All right, back to the show.
There's a lot of opportunities these days to get duped, or to like invest your time in things that don't have any return. And so I had a company, a broadcasting network reach out to me saying, hey, would you like to have your own radio show? We've been following you. You're really inspiring. We want some female show hosts. We'll get you on iHeartRadio. We'll get you on all these sites. And I'm like, this sounds amazing. I'm like, well, let me do my research, right? And I thought, I did a lot of research on this company. There was an investment up front, which wasn't astronomical. And they told me, well, the investment is basically us sending you the equipment because you run the show from your home. So we're going to send you the mics and all the studio equipment. And we're going to give you training, and you're going to have a team, and we're going to do your channel artwork. And it was like, okay, cool. That makes sense for what they're asking. And then I worked with them, and it was like one week after another, I was just underwhelmed by what they were providing. It just seemed so budget and like so antiquated, like the way they were operating things. Like the software to stream the radio show was Skype. And I'm like, wait, this is what you're training me on how to use Skype? Like I know how to use Skype. So when it came down to like the week I was supposed to launch this radio show, I found out it wasn't even going to be on iHeart. And I'm like, in the contract, I saw, like the contract itself says, your show will stream to blah, blah, blah with this many listeners. And I'm like, wait, so it's not going to be on iHeart? And they're like, oh no, we have to apply once the show launches, and then it's going to take like 4 to 6 weeks to get approved. And then I'm like, okay, well, how many listeners am I going to have on the other stations? Oh, you don't have any listeners. You've got to drive your own traffic. I'm like,
so what is their value at the end of the day?
So I'm like, so wait, so you're a network that has no network. So it was just weird. And So anyway, I backed out, and I was in the process of suing them in small claims court until the pandemic hit. So I'm still debating whether I'm going to do that. But you have to be you have to research like to the 10th level, because the one thing I did not do, perfect example, was go check out their Twitter account, their Instagram account, their Facebook account to see that there were no likes.
People.
Right.
Like if there's supposed to be a roster, right? Check out maybe you did this, maybe you didn't, I'm not sure, but check out the other people and maybe reach out to them and be like, hey, what did they actually do? Especially if they're not gonna, in some companies they don't put all the menu of services in great detail up front. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but maybe talk to other people who have done it. It's like, hey, what did they offer you? Because it seems like they presented one thing and then what they offered was like, what's the value here?
Yeah, it was interesting because I asked them, I said, are there any other radio hosts that I could talk to see what their experience has been like? And they sent me one guy who, like, basically they let him do whatever he wanted, and he had a huge network already. So, of course, he's going to say nothing but good things. So I only got, like, a very skewed perspective. And then, like, I think to this day, I'm still on their website, which I've already been like, you cannot use my likeness on your website to, like, dupe other people in. But yeah, but then, for example, with my agency, the guy that runs it reached out to me and he said, listen, I don't want you to decide yet. I want you to talk to as many of our speakers as possible because you might decide that this isn't for you. And I spoke to like 3 or 4 speakers and they all had the same amazing things to say.
So they were more of an open book.
Yes.
It was like, yeah, talk to whoever you want. We got nothing to hide. Like, if it's not for you, cool. Like, they weren't pressuring you. It was just more, hey, we're an open book. Talk to these people. And it was consistent versus the other thing where it was only an open book after you gave them money.
Right.
And by that time, it was too late.
Yeah, in my agency, there was no fee. It was just a 10-year agreement that we'd work together and they'd represent me for all youth speaking engagements. But, you know, I think like the whole discernment thing, you have to do it with everything. So I get a lot of requests to be on podcasts. And I can't say yes to all of them. I
appreciate you coming on this one.
Oh my gosh, of course. But it's like sometimes you have somebody random that heard me on somewhere else and they're like, can you be on my podcast? And I want to help and I want to say yes. And there's always maybe one listener that I could impact. But sometimes it's just not a good use of my time to spend 60 to 90 minutes in the middle of the day on a podcast that has 3 reviews and they can't even prove there's any listeners. So you really do have to like, you know, set boundaries on this stuff and practice the art of saying no and knowing that it's okay for you to, you know, not say yes to every opportunity that comes your way or go down every rabbit hole of an opportunity.
Would you think also being self-aware of like the level you're at in your career versus the opportunities that are coming up? Like if you're just starting out, then maybe getting on the podcast that doesn't have all the things, because then if that thing grows, like you're kind of growing with the same people at the same, I don't want to say level because it seems like a bad word, but that's the only thing I can think of, versus, you know, if you're just starting out, you may not get the top podcast with a million reviews because you're just starting out.
Yeah. You know, I think you just kind of, you kind of see like what you can get from it. So for example, if you've never been on a podcast before, you might really want the practice of it. So you're going to say yes to every opportunity. Yeah. Or if you have no media logos on your website, you're going to take any opportunity to get onto a media platform. So yeah, it really just depends what your goals are and where you are in your business. And you just start to make more strategic decisions.
Okay, whether you're starting out in your career, looking to hire someone for their creative services, searching for a mentor or coach, or evaluating a platform or service to use, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Do your homework. Ashley did her homework in abuse prevention, and that led her to becoming a subject matter expert. She also did her homework on the services she offered, which led her to streamline those offerings. She did her homework on the speaker agency that reached out to her before going into an agreement. And while she did do her homework on that not-so-great podcast network, she admits she should have asked about other hosts and shows using that network, as she then would have realized that network provided zero value while charging a lot of money up front. So before you start that business, that new career, hire a creative, or sign up for a service, do your homework. Because doing your homework can help you save on something valuable. Time. Comes to business coaching, how did you get into that? Was that, again, more of, was there a moment, a series of moments? Was it something like, hey, I'm running this business myself, essentially, maybe I could help other people? How did that all start? What was the evolution of that, the business coaching side of your life?
Yeah, it's not something that I've really put out there. But for a long time, I've just been like the go-to girl for like career questions or business questions, or like I want to start a nonprofit. And I think it's because I've been so transparent in my own like business journey. I mean, I've launched nonprofits, I've run my own business, I've had successful side hustles, and I think by sharing that journey, people have always just come to me. So over the years, I've had people ask like, "Hey, I'm trying to launch this business of my own. Can you work with me?" Or, "Hey, I'm having trouble with my branding or my marketing," or, "I want to write a speech and get paid to deliver it." And so I've just become like the go-to girl. And it's not something I've tried to grow or build, but I've really enjoyed it because I think I get really excited like meeting someone who also has this fire like I did at one point, and actually helping them to turn that like dream into a tangible reality in front of them. And so, yeah, I've been helping people over the years for a long time now, from startups to entrepreneurs to existing businesses. And when I first left my state job, my full-time 9-to-5 job, I wasn't sure exactly what my business even was yet. And so I had a marketing background, so I put out that I could do marketing consulting. And before I knew it, I was doing like marketing services for a nonprofit for a monthly fee. I was doing marketing for a home meal delivery company and doing business development with them. So it's just kind of been like this weird organic, like come and go thing, but I really dig it. It comes from a whole decade plus of just business knowledge that I love to share.
All right, what in your mind separates a legitimate like business coach from a maybe, I'm doing air quotes here, not so legitimate business coach? And also, if you keep hearing ice in the background, it's because I'm addicted to coffee and I need it. Yeah. However, this is the first time Ashley's doing that because she was smart enough to drink the coffee very sparingly, which I needed every 5 minutes to be awake and energetic enough for questions. I do it for you, for you, the people. And yeah, this could possibly be my new ASMR channel. I'm just going to be just the ice from iced coffee. But what is, a legitimate business coach from a non-legitimate one? Because I feel like anybody could just go on social media and buy followers, or anybody can have a slick website, or even better, I see, and I'm not trying to hate on anybody young, but it's like, if you're 21 years old, how are you a life coach? You haven't lived that much life yet. So it's almost that kind of thing. Like, how again, back to discerning, like what helps you discern a legitimate from a not so legitimate? Because my opinions are, if you've never started a business, then how are you a business coach? And I've seen business coaches out there like, what business do you have? Oh, I don't have one. So your business coach is literally, your business is the business of being a business coach, but you've never started a business.
Oh, yeah.
And you have clients that are like, yeah, I've done. I'm like, why? How? Like, how does that work?
There's life coaches that host a webinar on how to build an email list to sell your coaching services to then teach them how to host a webinar.
It's almost like a weird multi-level marketing thing more than anything.
No substance.
Yeah, but but you never did the thing. What?
Right.
Yeah, it breaks my brain. So
yeah, it's unfortunate because there's no accreditations or anything required to list yourself as a coach. Anyone can call themselves a coach and become one. And I think it depends on what your goals are. So like if you're starting a business and you need help with the tangible like action items of growing a business, you better find somebody who has a resume with a business background. Other people that hire a business coach, all they want is someone who keeps them accountable. So somebody that they can say, I'm working on this week, and next Friday when we connect, I'll have done it. And, I think for me, like you do want somebody with experience. You want somebody who can relate to you. But you're right. Some people just do a great job of building the shiny website and having a few testimonials. And I mean, sometimes those testimonials were from a free one-off session that they gave to someone. And if you get a session for free, of course you're going to write something nice.
Yeah, it's great. It was free. I didn't have to pay anything.
Yeah, and I think like it's tough because the coaching business now, a lot of coaches want you to pay a flat fee or 2 payments and you're in. Like there's no refunds, there's no money back once you've purchased. So I think it's just a matter of really doing your research. If you can, look at someone's testimonial and find that person on Instagram and ask them what they really thought of that coach. You're right. There's so many coaches out there and a lot of them are just a bunch of fluff, and they had money, they bought followers, and they paid for a great website. But I think if you do enough research, you can start to see the gaps and really figure out who's right for you and who isn't. And I think one of the things that's helped me in deciding who I would work with as a coach and where to invest money is I've really taken advantage of people that have like free opt-ins on their websites, or they're hosting like a free 5-day challenge on Facebook, because it lets me try them on and figure out if I like them or if I don't. So there's a lot of like people with YouTube channels, you can get to know them first. And I think that stuff really matters before you just whip out your credit card.
It's back to the whole, they're selling themselves rather than the product. And if you get to know them a little bit, it's probably, you can make a better choice rather than the people who don't do that. Or even better, the business coaches where their entire Instagram is like those really, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about here, but I hope you do. It's like those stereotypical gaudy pictures of like, and I've noticed that, well, with a lot of male business coaches, like it's it's not even them, it's like a random dude in a suit in a Ferrari, and it's like some quote they put on top of it, and it's like or a lion, and it's like, lions or wolves do not think about the opinions of sheep, and it's like, what does that have to do with anything? I just want to know if you run a business or it's like success is the mindset of the brave or some weird crap like that, and that's their entire feed, and it's like nothing about them or what they've done. And
yeah,
the fact that you just rolled your eyes to that, I was like, okay, she knows what I'm talking about. And yeah, I
have a hard time with it. I have a hard time with the canned like pieces of advice or just like the cliched motivational statements. I'm like, oh, like who is buying into this? And you're right. Some people, it's like you never see a picture of them. It's not an original word. It's just they're just finding a quote somewhere else and copying and pasting it and building a following with like a quotes page. And it's pretty cringy. I don't know.
What is your opinion on I think the term, and hopefully I'm using it correctly, because if not, somebody's gonna think this podcast took a really weird turn. What is your opinion on people that promote, or I've seen business coaches promote this like hustle porn, where it's just like, you need to work your face off for 20 hours a day and just not sleep, man, because that's what it. And I'm like, that might work for some people, but holy crap, like what about the people who they want to do this, but they have the family and the 9-to-5, and they have to transition away from it. Because it's great if you can go all in, but not everybody can. But I don't know if you've seen this or noticed this. I've noticed there's some YouTube channels and some Instagram people who are, it's like, it's hustle porn. And it's just like, I'm like, why?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're bringing this up, because I think it's a really skewed way of teaching successful entrepreneurship. It's like you hear about the 5 a.m. clubs and people like the 10x. You got to work 10x the hours to make 10x the money. And I completely think that is false. There are people, like there's proof in this, that there are people that work 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. at night doing all the things, and their business still doesn't take off. And I think this is like what we were talking about earlier, where like there's all the things you're supposed to do, right? Which is like within each of us, we have masculine energy and feminine energy, right? No matter what your gender is. And like the masculine is very like linear and task oriented and like doing the things. But I really believe, especially as a creative entrepreneur or any entrepreneur, you have to like marry in the feminine, which is like intuition, like renewal, taking moments of silence to let creative ideas come to you. And I don't think that working and doing all these action-oriented steps from morning till night accomplishes anything at all. And I think being in a being in a kind of female dominated coaching space and being surrounded by women like this, I know women that literally work like 2 hours a day. Like they wake up, they have their tea, they do yoga, they meditate, they have these ideas come to them, they create some authentic social media post, and then 5 minutes later, somebody else wants to pay them $5,000 to work with them. And so I think it's really just being authentic, simplifying the process, and just showing up from this place of like purpose and why I'm meant to serve. And I like sales funnels are great, but you don't need a crazy sales funnel. You don't need like the most advanced website. You don't need to create 3 YouTube videos a week or write 10 blog posts a month. Like those things can help you, but they're not required. I mean, I follow one chick who just hit $1 million in her business. She's got 25,000 followers, so it's not like she has 1 million followers, and she works very minimally. You know, she's just her, and people love her and want to work with her.
It's funny you mentioned that too, because one question I have is maybe we as people and anybody getting into this needs to think about what work is, because I think sometimes when you are, and I'm not hating on the 9 to 5 or lifestyle, because not everybody, I don't think everybody's cut out to be self-made, and I don't think there's anything wrong. Like you can be, I think Gary Vaynerchuk said it was like, hey, you can have your own, your own business. You're only making like 50,000 a year, but there's nothing wrong with being employee number 10 at Facebook because you're probably making bank and maybe not even working as hard. So it's being self-aware, but also, do you think like what we in our heads define as work? Only because like, so you were mentioning how this person works 2 hours a day, but maybe there's stuff going on in the background, or even like they're thinking about things all day and then they're able to execute so easily because it's been in there rattling around in their brain. John Cleese actually has a really good book that I picked up about creativity, and that's like one of the things he says where, it seems like the things he writes or comes up with come out of nowhere, but it was really because he didn't even realize till years of doing this that he was thinking about them constantly, and then when it comes time to do it, it just flows easily because he didn't realize he was thinking about it the entire time. So do we have to redefine what we think of as work and the output of said work?
Yeah, I think, I think we define work as like something that's not always so enjoyable, but the outcomes are enjoyable. Like work is not fun, in the traditional sense. And, we tend to reward like sacrifice. Like it's almost like being like, oh, I work, I wake up at 5 a.m. and I work till 10 p.m. and that's supposed to be like applauded. Like, oh, wow, they're hardworking. So I just think we need to like shift our perspective on that. And honestly, I think like the ultimate idea of work is getting paid just to be you. It's like I'm always quote unquote working, but like my work is who I am. Like it's me, it's my story, it's my passions, it's what I love talking about, it's what I love doing. It's like, if you're a musician, you love to create music, it's not work, it's you're getting paid to be you and do what you love. And I think that's what we need to start thinking about when we think of like what work is in our own lives. Is it enjoyable? Is it pleasurable? Is it me? And you're right. Some people really like just being told what to do and being given these tasks, and they get to punch out, and that's their place of comfort, and that works for them. But I think work can be pleasurable, and I think work can just be us being who we are.
Speaking of work, wanted to ask you about when you your book and what made you decide, hey, I'm going to write a book, and was that a new skill set you had to learn post public speaking? Did you have to, was it a transition of, oh, I have to change the mindset a little bit in order to write said book? Like what was the catalyst for that? And, did you have to switch gears? Did you have to balance it with the public speaking, all that good stuff?
Yeah. I think for me, I've just, like I mentioned earlier, I've always understood the power of real life storytelling.
Oh, what's the name of the book? Just if anybody wants to pick it up.
Yeah, the book is called The Language of Time. And it's unrelated to my speaking business, but it is related to my life. It's a memoir. My mom, unfortunately, developed Alzheimer's at 48 years old and passed from it at 56. So I became her caregiver. And from my teenage years up until today, I've always been a journaler, just to like vent and just, chronicle life's daily moments. And so I was journaling while I was taking care of her. And the more I journaled, I realized like this is a story that could also help people. I felt alone a lot of times when I was playing this caregiving role. So part of me, it was just like a passion project where I thought maybe this will be a book. And, I wrote it the way I would speak. That, there's like sayings that say the best writers are people that write the way they would speak. And so I just wrote it direct from my journal entries, transcribed it all, and self-published. June of 2020. So that was like my COVID baby. And I definitely had to like focus all my marketing efforts and my energy into the book and kind of like let speaking go silent for a bit, because it's its own marketing campaign. It's its own business in and of itself. And so, so I self-published, and it was an amazing launch. And again, it was something that I researched. I found courses I could buy online on how to self-publish, and I read blog posts, and I researched as best as I could, and I just figured out how to do it on my own.
What is your nonprofit Blue Hearts Project all about? Because I think you were speaking about your nonprofit earlier. So just to give the people out there listening to this what Blue Hearts Project is, what it's about, how it's helping people, etc.
Yeah, so I've launched 2 nonprofit initiatives over the last decade. Blue Hearts Project is actually not a nonprofit. It is like a social impact project. So over the years as a speaker, I've had so many survivors come up after a speech and say, like, this is amazing what you're doing. I would love to share my story to help others, but like I definitely don't want to stand on a stage and speak. And so they've asked me, like, how can I share my story? And I just thought, okay, 1, telling my story was healing, and I know it can be healing for other survivors. 2, I know that real life stories are what create the greatest level of awareness and understanding. And 3, there's survivors that want a platform to tell their stories. So this was, again, one of those, like, it was 11:30 at night. I was crawling into bed, and all of a sudden, Blue Hearts Project just popped into my head. And now it's a global storytelling platform for survivors of abuse, where people can submit their stories anonymously or by first name. And we've collected over, when I say we, I have like a small team of students that have helped me. We have over 300 stories from survivors all over the globe, like basically in a year and a half. And that's with little marketing or sharing of it. So it's a really incredible hub just to like read real life stories. And I've had a lot of feedback from the people that have contributed saying, going through the questions you asked and writing my story out made me realize, like, I'm so grateful for my life today, how strong I am. It helped me heal. So it's been really cool. It's had a lot of benefits. So yeah, that's blueheartsproject.com. Another little side project.
Well, we're coming up on the end here, and I've made this now a recurring tradition in the vein of Hot Ones, but you didn't have to eat a bunch of crazy spicy wings to do this. Which maybe that'll be a new thing. Hey, Hot Ones, if you're listening, we do a collab or something. But
yeah, hot cauliflower in my case.
Yeah, I think they've actually done that before. Yeah, like they've had some people on there who are vegetarians or vegans, and they're like, here, we're gonna make some either like soy or cauliflower or whatever happens to be. But anything out there that you're working on currently that you want to promote? How do people get in touch with you? How do they find you? You're just talking about Blue Hearts Project. Is there anything else you want to promote or put out there? Go for it.
Yeah. So one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been that I'm speaking virtually a lot now. And that has freed up so much of my schedule because before, I was sometimes flying for 2-3 weeks straight. So now that I have downtime, I'm finally adding like legitimate coaching into my business. So 1, I'm doing some public speaking coaching, but that's not really like where I'm investing my energy. I'm really excited right now to be a coach for other women and other survivors that have this ambition and drive to reclaim their life, but also like take this huge up level in life, whether it's they want to speak, they want to start a business. So I'm putting out coaching for women and survivors, and it's something that in the behind the scenes I have certifications. Like I have a life empowerment coaching certification. I'm currently getting certified in cognitive behavioral therapy. I have tons of just like therapeutic level, like holistic training background in helping people to heal from trauma and turn their lives around. And so, yeah, if anybody is interested in maybe some coaching, they can reach out to me and I'll share what I'm currently offering. I'm really excited to do that.
And what's the best way to reach out to you? Just the main website or social media accounts you want to plug, or?
Yeah, I'm everywhere just under my name, Ashley Bendiksen. So on all social medias at Ashley Bendiksen, and then my website is ashleybendiksen.com.
Any last piece of advice that you want to give to anybody listening to this podcast?
Yeah, if there's a little voice inside of you or a little feeling that's saying you are meant to show up more, express yourself in some way, or share your craft or your talent with the world, lean into it. It is a life-changing journey when you give yourself permission just to be who you are meant to be. You know, I did a social media post about this the other day. It is your purpose to be you on this earth, and time is short in the grand scheme of things, so start showing up for yourself and just see how your life will change. It's an amazing journey.
And that concludes this episode of the Creative Capital Show. Thank you for listening, and a special thanks goes to my guest, Ashley Bendiksen. The Creative Capital Show is hosted, recorded, edited, mixed, and produced by me, Jason Sylvia. You can listen to The Creative Capital Show over at our website, creativecapitalshow.com. We're also available on Anchor FM, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and all other major podcast hosting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe. Helps the show out a lot. And be sure to follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, keep on creating.